Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Single Malt Review. We are back down in Campbeltown now, and one of the very last things we could do down there because they don't make a great deal of whiskey. What have you got, Dave?
It is from the Springbank Distillery, their triple distilled, unpeated Hazelburn. In this case, it's the 12-year-old Hazelburn. Do like Springbank in all the very many forms, long row, Springbank itself, Hazelburn. I've got a special fondness though for Hazelburn because that unpeated softness is often so sweet and mellow and just all round so friendly and nice. I like that in a whiskey.
Friendly and nice are not things usually ascribed to Springbank. They normally make some rather challenging, you would call it, whiskies, some rather expert level drams. But Hazelburn is always the exception to that rule. Hazelburn is made in quite a different way. As Dave said, no peat goes into this, which makes it quite different because Springbank, and especially Long Row, which is their heavily peated version, is actually quite a peated whiskey as far as peating levels go. I'm not sure about the ppm, but it's fairly well up there, at least for a mainland whiskey. Hazelburn has none at all, which is quite interesting because it lets you really taste what is going on in Springbank without that peat. So you can really analyse what people refer to as the Maritime character, as we will discover.
Now, I recently tried Hazelburn 12-year-old after... It's been quite a while since I first had it, or since I last had it at least, and I recall it being a very sweet candy store in a glass, but I was surprised on more recent tasting to just get so much more out of it. Probably because my own experience as a person drinking whiskey has broadened since then.
Yes, indeed. Springbank, Hazelburn included, is a very complex whiskey. There's a great deal to find in there, but there are one or two standbys by which you can always sort of identify what you're drinking, if nothing else. And for me, it's a strawberry jam character, which is just that much more evident in this one without that tang of the peat. That comes through for me first and foremost.
For me, it's quite different. I don't get that. What I do get, though, is a lot of, say, citrusy boiled sweets. Or if you might have had, say, English-style rock candy. There's maybe some roasted peanuts, some Russian fudge, a bit of praline even. Still in that confectionery end of the spectrum, but with some less sweet elements thrown in, some of those fruits, some nuts, some savoury bits.
It's very much a sweet and salty for me. The peanuts I get to a certain extent, and the citrus in the form of sort of a candied peel is how it makes its impression to me. It's a very, very multi-layered nose, as all Springbanks are sort of inevitably end up being. This one maybe even more so because that massively primary character of the peat is removed.
Now, being triple distilled, I assume that means a more refined product. There's been more of it's sort of weeded out from around the edges. What would it mean in a technical sense?
Well, it means what it says, really. It's been distilled 3 times.
Sure.
Most Scotch is distilled twice, almost across the board. Triple distillation is more of an Irish thing. That's how they make Irish whiskies, and it's how they make some lowland whiskies. Auchentoshan is the probably the most famous triple distilled whiskey now, and it's certainly the most in circulation. As sadly the lowland distilleries are beginning to die off now. There's very, very few left. It's also odd purely for Springbank. Springbank normally, they have all sorts of strange distilling schedules. Actually, they call it 2.5 times distillation for the regular Springbank, and I'm not even game to say exactly how they achieve that, but Hazelburn is distilled 3 times. So it's, I suppose you could say, 1/3 more, maybe more pure or more neutral than the spirit coming out of most distilleries. But it's far from bland. So what we've got, I would say, is just more of one thing because you have less of another. It's not a case of a reduction, it's more a case of shining a light on a dimension of Springbank which is normally a little more occluded by some of the heavier elements. We're getting the lighter, fruitier, sweeter esters coming through, which are the ones that survive multiple distillations, whereas the heavy ones, the heavier, more robust, sort of grimy, grubby flavours, which Springbank is absolutely famous for and sought after for by some people, They are the ones that will have been distilled out by this sort of more aggressive distillation schedule. And that's more or less evident on the palate. It is lovely and estery sweet. Boiled sweets, as Dave says. Sort of very lifted, very, very fruity, very, very confectionery.
Some acidic fruits, citrus. I'm getting... Okay, this is going to really geographically sort of single us out, but pineapple lumps. A uniquely New Zealand, possibly you can get them elsewhere. They're a soft-centred, pineapple-filled flavoured sweet with a chocolate coating, and I'm getting that in abundance here.
And funnily enough, they are made with a synthesised hydrocarbon ester. So that's very apt for this one. There's not actually a great deal of pineapple in them. The flavour is generated in maybe a very similar way.
In addition to that, though, there is some, say, a little bit of slightly salted caramel. There's some more of that Russian fudge. There's even some maybe lemon meringue pie.
There's all sorts of things that you wouldn't typically get. There's very little spice. There's very little wood for a 12-year-old. And there's a great deal of this fruity sort of confectionery element. And I suspect the water is only going to bring out just a little bit more.
Yeah, bottled at a respectable 46% here, not chill filtered, not coloured, so you can add a fair slug of water without diluting it too far.
And you know, one of the oddest things about it is, even though I'm reading the words right here, no peat smoke, it almost, were you tasting it blind, you'd almost say there's a smoky quality to it.
Yes, there's a touch of brine to it. I guess that maritime flavour.
And that's exactly what it is. This is a really, really good way of getting in depth with the what people call the maritime element. And it's one of the most difficult things to describe in Scotch whisky. It's one of the more esoteric, more ethereal tasting notes that is nonetheless very, very commonly ascribed to a great many whiskies. A lot are given this sort of maritime label. It's quite sexy, quite fashionable in the world of commercial tasting notes to put that in there, but no one really wants to tell you what it means. And it's very, very evident in this one. It is a saltiness, it's a tanginess.
A little hint of brine, some brackish water.
It's even a little bit of, I'd almost describe it as a tiny bit of an iodine character, but where it comes from is the real mystery. The warehouses are more or less coastal, so some of it actually comes through from the air itself, from the coastal salty air of the west coast of Scotland, more coasty and salty than most. But it really can't all be that. I think in this case a lot of it comes from the fact that Springbank, like almost no one else now, distillery-wise, does their own maltings. They still have an operating malting floor, and all their malt, as far as I know, is done in-house. So I think that gives them a uniquely different cadence to their whisky once they're all said and done and it's all gone through the process, because it doesn't come from a big factory. They sort of do it more or less still by hand, and they do it on site in that coastal place. So I think that's where a lot of this particularly distinct maritime character comes from.
That's a good example of how sort of our unconscious biases come into play. We are so used to heavily peated whiskies being from Islay, therefore we associate any maritime characters, any of that unique salt or iodine, well, it must be from the peat. That's what our minds say. So we then taste something similar in another whisky and the mind instinctively goes to peat. It is good to have someone of us to challenge those biases, to just give us something new to think about and something new to taste.
It is a beguiling whisky, I'd have to describe it as, and I think one that I could very, very much recommend. Scores-wise, this is a 90 for me. It's a really one hell of a dram, I think.
And 92 for me.
Yeah, no, strong stuff, and really, unlike a lot of Springbank, which I wouldn't recommend to everybody, particularly sort of whisky newcomers, Hazelburn, like I said earlier, is the exception to that rule. It's really pretty approachable, and really quite a good one to learn on, I think, if you're not used to a more complex whisky, because without being aggressive without being sort of difficult to cope with. There is almost like no other dram that we've tasted for some time. There's something new to come back to, glass after glass, with this one. As Dave said, you just leaving it for a couple of months and coming back, he's found things in there that were not evident earlier, and I would tend to agree. Springbank is just a real good one for coming back and finding something you never thought was there before, even sip to sip sometimes. It is eclectic if absolutely nothing else. Anyway, that was Hazelburn by Springbank. I will see what I can find from Springbank. It gets a bit scarce as you go beyond the 15-year-old, but I suppose we haven't done a long row yet, so I might see if I can seize one of those bottles and we'll see what's in that one. Then we would have more or less covered the range, but at any rate, you'll just have to wait for that one. But in the meantime, we will have something to fill you in with your whiskey needs, so keep safe. Sludger.